Close your eyes now and let yourself drift backward through time, through the decades, across continents and oceans, until you find yourself in a place that exists between Earth and the infinite black. It is April 12th, 1961, and you are suspended inside a sphere of metal barely wider than your outstretched arms, a capsule that the Soviets call Vostok, which means east in Russian, though the direction you're about to travel has nothing to do with compass points and everything to do with up and away from everything humanity has ever known. The temperature inside this metal womb is carefully regulated, hovering around 20 degrees Celsius, but you can feel the coolness of the steel through your bright orange pressure suit, can sense the chill that seems to emanate from the very walls themselves. The air you breathe has a particular quality to it, recycled and filtered, carrying the faint metallic tang of machinery and the almost imperceptible scent of rubber and fabric from your suit. Your breath comes steady, measured, each inhalation and exhalation monitored by sensors, recorded by instruments, analyzed by men in distant control rooms who watch your vital signs with the intensity of priests reading sacred texts. Outside your small portholes, you can glimpse fragments of the Kazakh steppe, that vast flatness stretching to horizons that seem impossibly distant even from your vantage point atop a rocket 30 meters tall. The morning light is particular here, soft and golden, the kind of light that makes you think of new beginnings, of days when anything seems possible. But soon, very soon, you will leave this light behind and enter a different kind of illumination altogether, one that comes not from a sun rising over familiar Earth, but from the curve of the planet itself as it hangs in the velvet darkness of space. Your name is Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin. You are 27 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, a former foundryman's apprentice who learned to fly because you couldn't imagine anything more beautiful than soaring above the earth. You are a husband to Valentina, father to 2 small daughters who don't fully understand what their papa is about to do. You are a son of collective farmers, a child who survived Nazi occupation, a young man who discovered that the sky was not a ceiling, but an invitation. And in less than 15 minutes, you are going to become something that has never existed before. The first, the only, the human being who will break the ancient chains of gravity and touch the stars. Listen now. Can you hear it? The subtle vibrations traveling through the rocket's frame, the distant hum of pumps circulating fuel, the crackle of radio communications as voices check and recheck every system, every connection, every possibility for failure. There are so many ways this can go wrong. The rocket could explode on the pad, as happened to a previous test launch, killing dogs and engineers alike in a fireball visible for miles. The capsule could tumble out of control during re-entry, subjecting you to forces that would render you unconscious or worse. The parachute system could fail, sending you and your metal sphere plummeting to the steppe at terminal velocity, ending your brief time as humanity's representative in the cosmos. But you have trained for this. You have spent hours in centrifuges, experiencing forces 8 times the pull of gravity until your vision tunneled and your body felt like it weighed half a ton. You have been sealed in anechoic chambers, spending days in complete silence and isolation, testing whether your mind can endure the loneliness of space. You have studied celestial mechanics and orbital dynamics, learning the mathematics that will keep you alive, the calculations that describe your arc through the void. And more than training, more than preparation, you have this moment.
this singular, unrepeatable instant when you are about to cross a threshold that no human has ever crossed before, when you will look down on Earth from a vantage point that has existed only in dreams and stories and the fevered imaginings of poets who wrote about angels and the spaces between the stars. Your pulse is steady, 64 beats per minute, the doctors will note later, remarkably calm for a man sitting atop 400 tons of kerosene and liquid oxygen, essentially a controlled explosion waiting to be unleashed. You can feel your heartbeat, that ancient rhythm, that proof of life, echoing in your chest, in your temples, in the very tips of your fingers that rest on the controls you may or may not need to use, depending on whether the automatic systems function as designed. Through your headset, you hear the voice of Sergei Korolev, the chief designer, the genius who made this moment possible, though his name is still a state secret, unknown to the world beyond the Soviet space program. He speaks to you with a mixture of pride and fear, this man who has sent you into danger, into history, into the unknown. He calls you his little eagle, his hope, his gamble against the Americans who are racing to do exactly what you're about to do. The countdown continues, numbers falling like leaves from a calendar, marking the seconds until transformation. You think briefly of your mother, Anna, who worked as a milkmaid and taught herself to read because she believed in the power of knowledge. You think of your father, Alexei, the carpenter who showed you how to shape wood with your hands, how to build things that last. You think of your older siblings, Valentin and Zoya, who survived being taken to Nazi labor camps, who came home when you'd thought them dead forever. You think of all the people who could have been here instead of you, the other cosmonauts who trained alongside you, who were just as capable, just as brave, just as ready to make this journey. German Titov, your backup, who will fly 4 months from now and experience space sickness, the first human to suffer nausea in zero gravity. The others from the Sochi 6, the elite group selected from 20 candidates, each of them worthy of this honor. But it's you. It's always been you, though you didn't know it growing up in that small village, didn't know it when you were learning to make molds for metal castings, didn't know it when you first climbed into the cockpit of a Yak 118 trainer and felt the joy of flight for the first time. The universe, if it has a consciousness, if it notices such things, has been arranging the pieces of your life to bring you to this moment, this capsule, this threshold. The vibration changes. You can feel it through your body, through the seat that's been custom molded to fit your form, through every point of contact between you and the spacecraft. The engines are being brought to full thrust. In seconds, the hold-down clamps will release, and you will begin your ascent, your transformation, your lonely journey into a place that no human has ever been. And so you speak, into the microphone, into history, words that will be remembered as long as humans remember anything. Poyekhali, let's go. It's time. The adventure begins. The metal beast beneath you roars to life, and you begin to rise, and everything changes forever.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand the man in the capsule, the man about to become the first human in space, we must travel further back to a time before rockets and training programs, before the very concept of spaceflight seemed possible to anyone outside the realm of science fiction writers and dreamers. Let us drift now to a spring day in 1934, to a village called Klushino in the Smolensk Oblast, a region of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic that stretches across gentle hills and farmland, where the soil is black and rich, and the air carries the scent of growing things. The date is March 8th, International Women's Day,
though the baby being born as evening settles over the collective farm will officially be registered as arriving on March 9th, because the baby's father, Alexei Ivanovich Gagarin, believed that a man could not be born on International Women's Day, and what father couldn't adjust a birth date by a few hours in the telling? The baby is the third child of Alexei and Anna Timofeyevna Gagarina, joining an older brother, Valentin, born in 1924, and an older sister, Zoya, born in 1927. A younger brother, Boris, will arrive 2 years later, completing the family. They name him Yuri, a common Russian name that means farmer or earth worker, fitting for a child born into a family that makes its living from the land. Alexei Gagarin is a skilled carpenter and bricklayer, a man who understands the properties of wood and stone, who can shape raw materials into useful things with his hands. He teaches his children this skill, showing them how to hold tools, how to measure twice and cut once, how to see the potential in a piece of timber that others might dismiss as scrap. Anna works as a milkmaid on the Sovkhoz, the state farm, rising before dawn to tend the cattle, her hands growing strong and capable from the daily labor of milking and feeding and caring for animals that provide sustenance for the community. But Anna is not merely a worker, she is a reader, voracious in her appetite for books, despite having limited formal education. She believes in the power of knowledge, in the possibility that her children might have opportunities she never had, might escape the grinding poverty that has defined rural Russian life for generations. She reads to Yuri and his siblings when she has the energy after long days of work, stories that open windows onto worlds beyond the boundaries of Klushino, beyond even the vast expanse of the Soviet Union itself. The house where Yuri spends his early childhood is modest, as are all the dwellings in the village, built from logs and heated by a wood-burning stove that dominates one wall, radiating warmth during the brutal Russian winters when temperatures plunge far below freezing and snow accumulates in drifts that can bury a child. The air inside such houses has a particular quality, dry from the wood smoke, carrying the mingled scents of cooking food, of bodies living in close quarters, of the mustiness that comes from storing root vegetables in cellars dug beneath wooden floorboards. Yuri is a happy child by all accounts, curious and energetic, quick to laugh and slow to anger. He has his mother's dark eyes and his father's sturdy build, though he will never grow tall, will remain compact and muscular throughout his life, a physique that will later prove advantageous when space capsules are designed for minimal weight and maximum efficiency. He plays in the village with other children, games that involve running and hiding, and the imaginative transformation of sticks into swords, of mud into fortifications, of ordinary days into adventures. In the summers, the days stretch long and golden, the sun barely setting before rising again, and the children of Klushino run wild in the fields surrounding the village, their feet bare and their faces tanned, their laughter carrying across the landscape. Yuri learns the names of birds and trees, learns to identify clouds and predict weather, learns the rhythms of agricultural life where everything depends on the seasons, on the capricious mercy of rain and sun, and the absence of killing frosts. In the winters, the world contracts. The cold is not merely cold, but something alive and malicious, seeking entry through every crack, every gap in clothing or shelter. Ice forms in intricate patterns on windows, frost accumulates on the inside walls, and breath turns to vapor in the frigid air of mornings before the stove has been properly stoked. The children venture outside when they must, bundled in layers of wool and felt, their movements restricted by the bulk of winter clothing, their time outdoors limited by the danger of frostbite that can claim fingers and toes with terrifying speed. It is during one of these winters, when Yuri is 7 years old and has just begun his first year of school, that everything changes. The year is 1941. Germany has invaded the Soviet Union in a massive assault that takes the defending forces almost completely by surprise. The Nazi Wehrmacht rolls across the western borders with mechanized precision, capturing vast territories, surrounding entire armies, driving towards Moscow with an arrogance born of previous victories in Poland and France. The Blitzkrieg, they call it, the Lightning War, and for a time it seems unstoppable. The retreating Red Army passes through Klushino in a chaos of desperate flight. Soldiers who have been beaten back again and again, who have lost their formations and their commanders, who move with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of men who have seen too much death too quickly. They requisition food and livestock from the collective farm, taking what they need for the continued retreat, leaving the villagers with less than they need to survive the coming winter. And then the Germans arrive.
It is October 18th, 1941, when the Nazi forces capture Klushino. Yuri will remember this day for the rest of his life, will carry the memory of it like a scar tissue over his heart. The soldiers come in vehicles that belch black smoke and make terrible mechanical noises, their uniforms gray and efficient, their weapons held with casual menace. They are conquerors, and they behave as conquerors have always behaved. On their first day in the village, they burn down the school. Yuri watches from hiding as the building where he learned to read, where a dedicated teacher had been showing the children the magic of transforming symbols on a page into meaning, into stories, into knowledge, goes up in flames. The wood is old and dry, and it burns with an enthusiasm that seems almost eager, the flames reaching high into the October sky, the smoke visible for miles. The ermine officer who commands the occupying force selects the Gagarin house for his headquarters. The family is given no choice in the matter. The officer, whose name Yuri never learns, moves into the main room, and the Gagarins are forced to build a tiny mud hut at the back of their own property, a cramped space measuring perhaps 3 meters by 3 meters, barely large enough for the 6 of them to lie down simultaneously. The walls are made from mud mixed with straw, the roof from salvaged boards and thatch. There is no stove, no insulation, no protection against the cold that will soon arrive with the full force of Russian winter. They will live in this hovel for 21 months, nearly 2 years of occupation, of fear, of hunger that goes beyond mere discomfort into actual starvation territory, of watching their neighbors collaborate or resist or simply try to survive day by impossible day. Young Yuri, barely 8 years old when the occupation begins, will grow into a boy of 10 before liberation comes, and the experience will mark him in ways both obvious and subtle. The cold of that first winter under occupation is something beyond cold, a cold that enters your bones and never fully leaves, that makes you understand viscerally, terribly, that the human body is a fragile thing, a machine that requires fuel and warmth and can shut down if deprived of these necessities for too long. They burn whatever they can find for heat, but there's never enough. They eat whatever food they can scrounge or hide from the occupiers, but there's never enough. Yuri's younger brother Boris becomes ill, and for a time it seems he might not survive, and all the family can do is huddle together for warmth and hope. Yuri commits small acts of sabotage. When he can, when he thinks he won't be caught, he pours soil into the batteries of German vehicles left unguarded, mixing different types of chemical supplies that the soldiers need for maintaining their equipment. These are tiny gestures of resistance, almost meaningless in the larger context of the war, but they give him a sense of agency, a feeling that he is not entirely helpless, not entirely a victim. But then, in 1943, something worse happens.
The Germans, preparing for their eventual retreat as the tide of war begins to turn against them, begin seizing young people from the occupied territories to send back to Germany as forced labor. Valentin and Zoya, Yuri's older siblings, are taken. They are loaded into trucks with dozens of other young men and women from the surrounding area and driven west toward Poland and eventually Germany, where they will work in factories and farms, treated little better than slaves, existing on starvation rations and the constant threat of violence for any perceived resistance or inadequate productivity. The family believes they are dead. Months pass with no word, no information, nothing but the absence where Valentin and Zoya used to be. Anna grieves with a silence that is somehow worse than wailing would be, a silence that settles over her like snow, heavy and cold. Alexei grows harder, more withdrawn, his anger at his own helplessness to protect his children manifesting in brusque commands and long silences during which he works with his hands, because work is at least something he can control. But then, in 1943, something worse happens. The Germans, preparing for their eventual retreat as the tide of war begins to turn against them, begin seizing young people from the occupied territories to send back to Germany as forced labor. Valentin and Zoya, Yuri's older siblings, are taken. They are loaded into trucks with dozens of other young men and women from the surrounding area and driven west toward Poland and eventually Germany, where they will work in factories and farms, treated little better than slaves, existing on starvation rations and the constant threat of violence for any perceived resistance or inadequate productivity. The family believes they are dead. Months pass with no word, no information, nothing but the absence where Valentin and Zoya used to be. Anna grieves with a silence that is somehow worse than wailing would be, a silence that settles over her like snow, heavy and cold. Alexei grows harder, more withdrawn, his anger at his own helplessness to protect his children manifesting in brusque commands and long silences during which he works with his hands, because work is at least something he can control. But then, in 1943, something worse happens. The Germans, preparing for their eventual retreat as the tide of war begins to turn against them, begin seizing young people from the occupied territories to send back to Germany as forced labor. Valentin and Zoya, Yuri's older siblings, are taken. They are loaded into trucks with dozens of other young men and women from the surrounding area and driven west toward Poland and eventually Germany, where they will work in factories and farms, treated little better than slaves, existing on starvation rations and the constant threat of violence for any perceived resistance or inadequate productivity. The family believes they are dead. Months pass with no word, no information, nothing but the absence where Valentin and Zoya used to be. Anna grieves with a silence that is somehow worse than wailing would be, a silence that settles over her like snow, heavy and cold. Alexei grows harder, more withdrawn, his anger at his own helplessness to protect his children manifesting in brusque commands and long silences during which he works with his hands, because work is at least something he can control. But then, in 1943, something worse happens. The Germans, preparing for their eventual retreat as the tide of war begins to turn against them, begin seizing young people from the occupied territories to send back to Germany as forced labor. Valentin and Zoya, Yuri's older siblings, are taken. They are loaded into trucks with dozens of other young men and women from the surrounding area and driven west toward Poland and eventually Germany, where they will work in factories and farms, treated little better than slaves, existing on starvation rations and the constant threat of violence for any perceived resistance or inadequate productivity. The family believes they are dead. Months pass with no word, no information, nothing but the absence where Valentin and Zoya used to be. Anna grieves with a silence that is somehow worse than wailing would be, a silence that settles over her like snow, heavy and cold. Alexei grows harder, more withdrawn, his anger at his own helplessness to protect his children manifesting in brusque commands and long silences during which he works with his hands, because work is at least something he can control. But then, in 1943, something worse happens. The Germans, preparing for their eventual retreat as the tide of war begins to turn against them, begin seizing young people from the occupied territories to send back to Germany as forced labor. Valentin and Zoya, Yuri's older siblings, are taken. They are loaded into trucks with dozens of other young men and women from the surrounding area and driven west toward Poland and eventually Germany, where they will work in factories and farms, treated little better than slaves, existing on starvation rations and the constant threat of violence for any perceived resistance or inadequate productivity. The family believes they are dead. Months pass with no word, no information, nothing but the absence where Valentin and Zoya used to be. Anna grieves with a silence that is somehow worse than wailing would be, a silence that settles over her like snow, heavy and cold. Alexei grows harder, more withdrawn, his anger at his own helplessness to protect his children manifesting in brusque commands and long silences during which he works with his hands, because work is at least something he can control.
And then, early in 1943, the Red Army returns. The liberation of Klushino comes not with fanfare, but with exhaustion. These are not the same soldiers who retreated 2 years earlier. These are veterans who have fought through the hell of Stalingrad, who have learned to beat the Germans at their own game, who are now grinding westward with implacable determination, pushing the occupiers back, kilometer by bloody kilometer. The German officer in the Gagarin house flees with his unit. The mud hut where the family has survived becomes redundant as they reclaim their home, though it is damaged and depleted, stripped of anything useful by the retreating forces. The school is eventually rebuilt, though it will be years before it resembles anything like what it was before. And slowly, painfully, the village begins to recover. It is not until 1945, when the war finally ends, when Germany has been utterly defeated, its cities reduced to rubble, its armies destroyed or captured, that Valentin and Zoya come home. They are alive, somehow, against all odds and expectations, but they are changed. They are thinner, harder, carrying experiences that they will never fully articulate, that will manifest in nightmares and sudden moments of withdrawal, in the ways trauma always manifests in those who survive the unsurvivable. Yuri, now 11 years old, has been shaped by these years in ways he cannot yet understand. He has learned about cruelty and resilience, about the fragility of civilization and the strength required to rebuild it, about the capacity of human beings to endure conditions that seem unendurable. He has learned that the world is not safe, that terrible things can happen without warning or justice, that survival sometimes requires not just courage, but luck, random chance, the arbitrary mercy of circumstances beyond anyone's control. But he has also learned about hope, about the way his mother continued to read when she could find books, continued to believe in education even when there was no school, about the way his father continued to work with his hands, building and repairing, refusing to let the occupation destroy his sense of purpose, about the way communities pulled together in times of crisis, sharing what little they have, protecting each other when protection is possible.
And most importantly, for what will come later, for the man he will become, Yuri has learned something about himself. He has learned that he can endure, that he can resist, that he can maintain his sense of self even when external circumstances try to crush it. He has learned that inside him is a core of something solid, something that won't break no matter how much pressure is applied. These lessons, learned in mud huts and burned schools and the long cold nights of occupation, will serve him well when he finds himself sitting in another cramped space, another place where survival depends on maintaining composure under extreme pressure, where the difference between success and failure might come down to the ability to stay calm when every instinct screams panic. But that is still years away. For now, in 1946, the Gagarin family makes a decision. They will leave Klushino, will move to the nearby town of Zhatsk, where there might be better opportunities for work and education, where the memory of occupation might be slightly less immediate and overwhelming. They pack their few possessions and make the journey, and Yuri begins the next chapter of his life, still just a boy, still dreaming ordinary dreams, not yet aware that the sky above him is not a ceiling, but a door.
Zhatsk is larger than Klushino, though by the standards of major Soviet cities it remains modest, a town rather than a true urban center. But to Yuri, moving there at age 12 feels like discovering a new world. The town has paved streets, at least in the center, and buildings made from brick and stone rather than just logs. There are shops and a proper school, one that hasn't been burned and rebuilt, one with multiple teachers and actual books beyond the cast-off military manuals they'd used in the makeshift village school. The school in Zhatsk is run by volunteers initially, young people, mostly women, who have dedicated themselves to rebuilding the Soviet education system after the devastation of war. They are passionate and idealistic, these teachers, believing that education is the key to creating the communist utopia promised by the revolution, that each child represents potential waiting to be unlocked through proper instruction and encouragement. Yuri proves to be an excellent student. He has a quick mind and an even quicker memory, able to recall with precision things he's read or heard, able to make connections between different subjects, to see patterns and relationships that less attentive students miss. His favorite subjects are mathematics and science, where problems have definite answers, where the universe reveals itself through numbers and formulas, where the behavior of physical objects can be predicted and understood through the application of reason. But what truly captures his imagination, what makes his heart race and his mind soar, is the sight of aircraft. Even during the war years, even in occupied Klushino, he had been fascinated by aircraft. He remembers a Soviet fighter plane making an emergency landing near the village during the occupation, the pilot injured but alive, and the way the aircraft had looked, even damaged and grounded, sleek and purposeful, a machine that could do what birds could do, could defy gravity itself. In Zhatsk, aircraft pass overhead with some regularity. They are mostly military planes, Yak fighters and Ilyushin bombers, the Air Force conducting training exercises or patrol missions over the western regions of the Soviet Union. Whenever Yuri hears the distinctive sound of aircraft engines, he stops whatever he's doing and looks up, tracking the planes across the sky, watching the vapor trails they leave behind, those white lines that mark their passage through the blue. He begins building model aircraft with his younger brother Boris and other boys in the neighborhood. They use whatever materials they can scavenge, pieces of wood from construction sites, fabric from old clothes, glue made from boiled flour and water. The models are crude but functional, and when thrown properly, they can glide surprising distances, banking and turning in response to how their weight is distributed, how their control surfaces are angled. Through these models, Yuri learns the basics of aerodynamics without knowing that's what he's learning. He discovers that wings need to have a particular shape, curved on top and flatter on the bottom to generate lift. He learns about the importance of balance, how the center of gravity must be positioned correctly or the model will nosedive or stall.
He learns through trial and error, through countless crashes and adjustments, through the kind of hands-on experimentation that teaches more deeply than any textbook ever could. A former Soviet airman joins the school's teaching staff, bringing with him actual knowledge of mathematics and physics, real expertise that goes beyond the enthusiasm of volunteers. This teacher recognizes something in Yuri, sees the intensity with which the boy approaches problems, the way he persists even when solutions aren't immediately obvious, the spark of genuine intellectual curiosity that can't be faked or taught, that either exists or doesn't. The teacher encourages Yuri, provides extra problems to solve, shares stories about flying, about what it feels like to climb into a cockpit and take control of a machine that can carry you into the sky. These stories entrance Yuri in a way that nothing else does. They create in him a hunger, a desire so profound it feels almost physical, a need to experience flight not as a passenger but as a pilot, to be the one making decisions, controlling the aircraft, dancing between earth and heaven. But dreams require resources, and the Gagarin family has few. Alexei works as a carpenter, and his skills are in demand as the country rebuilds, but the pay is modest. Anna has found work in a local dairy, continuing the same kind of labor she performed on the collective farm, her hands still knowing the rhythm of milking, of caring for cattle, of producing the milk and butter and cheese that feed the community. The family has enough to eat, enough to wear, enough to survive, but luxuries like flying lessons are impossibly distant, belong to a world of privilege that seems forever beyond their reach. And so at 16, Yuri makes a practical decision. He will learn a trade. He will become a foundryman, someone who makes molds for casting metal, a skilled position in the industrial economy of the Soviet Union, one that offers steady work and decent wages. It's not flying, but it's something, a path forward, a way to contribute to the family finances and eventually establish his own independence. He moves to Lyuberdzi, a town near Moscow, where there is a large steel plant looking for apprentices. The work is hot and heavy, physically demanding in ways that farming never was. The foundry is a place of extremes, of molten metal glowing white-hot, of steam and smoke, of the constant roar of machinery, of temperatures that swing wildly from the furnace heat to the cold of Moscow winters when you step outside during breaks. Yuri learns to make molds from wooden patterns, to understand the properties of different metals and how they behave when poured, to troubleshoot problems when castings come out malformed or cracked or otherwise defective. He develops the muscular build that will characterize his adult body, his arms and shoulders growing strong from wielding heavy tools, from moving materials, from the unrelenting physical demands of industrial labor. But he doesn't give up on education. In the evenings, after long shifts at the plant, he attends classes at a local young workers' school, pursuing his 7th grade education through courses designed for those who must work during the day. He arrives at these classes exhausted, his hands blackened from metal dust, his body aching, but he pays attention, takes notes, completes assignments with the same thoroughness he brings to his foundry work.
In 1951, after graduating from both the 7th grade and his vocational training with honors, Yuri is selected for further education at the Saratov Industrial Technical School, a more advanced institution that will prepare him for supervisory positions in industrial settings. Saratov is a city, a real city, on the banks of the Volga River, one of the major urban centers of the Soviet Union, and moving there represents another expansion of Yuri's world. And it is in Saratov in 1952, when Yuri is 18 years old, that his life takes the turn that will eventually lead him to that capsule, that rocket, that moment when everything changes. He discovers the Saratov Aero Club. The Aero Club is a Soviet institution, part of the DOSAF, the Voluntary Society for Assistance to the Army, Aviation, and Navy, an organization that provides preliminary training to young people who might eventually serve in the military. The club has actual aircraft, Yak-18 trainers, 2-seat planes designed to teach the basics of flying, and they offer instruction to anyone willing to commit the time and effort required to learn. Yuri signs up immediately. He has to balance the training with his studies at the technical school and with part-time work as a dock laborer to earn money for living expenses. But he doesn't care. He would sleep less, eat less, sacrifice anything necessary for the chance to fly. The thought of actually sitting in a cockpit, actually controlling an aircraft, fills him with an excitement so intense it's almost painful. The training begins on the ground, of course. Hours of classroom instruction covering aerodynamics, meteorology, navigation, aircraft systems, emergency procedures, everything a pilot needs to know before ever leaving the Earth. Yuri absorbs it all with the same focused intensity he brought to his schoolwork, understanding intuitively that aviation rewards preparation, that the more you know, the safer you are, that flying is not just about physical skill, but intellectual mastery of complex systems. Then come the simulator sessions, where he practices on mock-ups of cockpits, learning where every control is positioned, how to read instruments, how to go through pre-flight checklists systematically, how to respond to simulated emergencies with procedures that must become second nature, muscle memory that doesn't require conscious thought when seconds matter. And finally, incredibly, the day comes when he will actually fly. His instructor is an experienced pilot who has seen hundreds of students, who can usually predict within a few minutes whether someone has the aptitude for flying or will always struggle. They walk out to the Yak-18 together, and Yuri performs his pre-flight inspection with exaggerated care, checking everything twice, not wanting to make any mistakes that might delay or cancel this momentous occasion. The cockpit of a Yak-18 is cozy, just barely large enough for two people sitting in tandem, the student in front, the instructor behind, both positions having identical controls, so the instructor can take over instantly if necessary. The smell of aviation fuel and oil is sharp and distinctive, mixing with the leather scent of the seats, the metallic tang of instrument panels. Yuri straps himself in, the harness tighter than anything he's worn before, designed to keep him secure during aerobatic maneuvers that he's not yet qualified to attempt. The engine starts with a cough and a roar, the propeller spinning into visibility and then becoming a blur, the whole airframe vibrating with contained power. Through his headset, Yuri can hear his instructor's voice, calm and professional, guiding him through the taxi to the runway, explaining how the rudder pedals control the tail wheel on the ground, how to keep the aircraft centered on the taxiway. And then they're at the runway threshold, and his instructor says the words that change everything. "Your aircraft, take us up." Yuri advances the throttle. The engine note changes, rises, becomes a sustained howl of power. The Yak-18 begins to move, slowly at first, then faster, accelerating down the runway as wind resistance builds and the control surfaces become effective. At exactly the right moment, when the airspeed indicator shows the correct number, Yuri eases back on the stick and the aircraft rotates, the nose coming up, and suddenly, impossibly, wonderfully, they are no longer touching the ground. They are flying. The sensation is unlike anything Yuri has ever experienced, unlike anything he even imagined. The earth falls away beneath them, the runway becoming a ribbon, the buildings of the airfield shrinking to toy size, the Volga River spreading out like liquid silver in the afternoon light. He can feel every movement of the aircraft through the controls, the way it responds to his inputs, the way it wants to fly, the way it becomes an extension of his will. His instructor talks him through basic maneuvers, straight and level flight, maintaining altitude and heading, gentle turns, coordinating rudder and aileron, feeling the aircraft bank and the horizon tilt, climbs and descents, managing power and pitch to control vertical speed. Each action produced a predictable result, cause and effect made visible and tangible, the aircraft responding to Yuri's commands with mechanical precision. Time collapses and expands simultaneously. The flight seems to last both seconds and hours, too brief and too long, over almost as soon as it begins, and yet containing within it an infinity of sensation and emotion. When they land, when the wheels touch the runway again and they taxi back to the parking area, Yuri is transformed. He has discovered what he is meant to do. Everything that came before, every experience and skill and lesson has been preparation for this moment, this discovery that flying is not just something he wants to do, but something he must do, something as essential to his existence as breathing. He will later say in an interview many years later, "I could have gone on flying through space forever." But before space, before fame, before history, there was this, a young man in Saratov discovering that the sky was not a limit but an invitation, that human beings could indeed touch the heavens, and that he, Yuri Gagarin, son of a carpenter and a milkmaid, survivor of Nazi occupation, former foundryman's apprentice, was capable of becoming someone who flew.
In 1955, after graduating from the Saratov Industrial Technical School, Yuri faced a choice. He could pursue a career in the metallurgy industry, using his training to secure steady employment in one of the Soviet Union's many industrial plants, earning a reliable income, living a predictable life. Or he could join the Soviet Air Force, becoming a military pilot, accepting lower pay and greater risk in exchange for the opportunity to fly regularly, to master increasingly complex aircraft, to become truly exceptional at the thing he loved most. The choice, when framed this way, was no choice at all. Yuri applied to the Orenburg Higher Air Force School, one of the premier military flight training institutions in the Soviet Union. His performance at the Saratov Aero Club, his academic record, and his obvious dedication to aviation made him an attractive candidate, and he was accepted into the program that would begin in the autumn of 1955. Orenburg is in the southern Urals, not far from the border with Kazakhstan, a place where the steppe stretches endlessly in all directions, where the horizons are so distant they seem to curve, where the sky dominates everything, an immense blue dome that dwarfs the earth beneath it. The flying weather here is excellent most of the year, which is why the Air Force maintains a major training facility at this location, why thousands of young men have learned to fly in these skies. The training is rigorous, designed to eliminate those who lack the right combination of skills, temperament, and dedication. The physical demands are considerable, the academic requirements extensive, and the flying itself is both exhilarating and terrifying, especially when students progress to more advanced maneuvers, when they must push themselves and their aircraft to the limits of performance. Yuri excels. He has a natural aptitude for flying, a kind of intuitive understanding of three-dimensional movement, of energy management, of how to make an aircraft do exactly what he wants it to do. But more than natural talent, he has discipline. He studies harder than many of his classmates, reviews procedures until they're burned into his memory, practices emergency responses until they become automatic, refusing to accept mediocrity when excellence is possible through effort. It's during this period that Yuri meets Valentina Ivanovna Goryacheva, a medical student at the Orenburg Medical School. They meet at a dance, that most traditional of ways for young people to encounter each other, and there's an immediate attraction. Valentina is intelligent and practical, training to become a doctor, someone who believes in service and healing, someone who sees in Yuri not just his current status as a flight student, but the determination and character that will carry him far. They begin seeing each other regularly, stealing time between Yuri's training schedule and Valentina's studies, walking along the Ural River that flows through Orenburg, talking about their futures, their dreams, their plans.
Yuri is direct in his affections, not given to elaborate romantic gestures, but sincere in his intentions, and Valentina appreciates this directness, this lack of pretense. She can see that he is someone who will commit fully to whatever he chooses to do, whether it's flying or marriage or any other serious undertaking. In 1957, shortly before Yuri's graduation from the flight school, they marry. It's a simple ceremony, as befits two young people with limited resources, but it's genuine, marking the beginning of a partnership that will last until Yuri's death, through all the challenges and triumphs that neither of them can yet imagine. Yuri graduates from Orenburg in November of 1957 with the rank of senior lieutenant, qualified to fly MiG-15 jet fighters. The MiG-15 is a formidable aircraft, a swept-wing jet that proved its worth in the Korean War, capable of speeds approaching the sound barrier, armed with cannons designed to intercept enemy bombers at high altitude. Flying it requires a level of skill and confidence beyond what's needed for propeller trainers, requires managing much higher speeds, dealing with jet engine quirks, understanding the dynamics of transonic flight, where the air behaves in counterintuitive ways. His first assignment is to Losteri Air Base, a remote posting near Murmansk in the Arctic Circle, one of the northernmost permanent settlements in the world. It is here, in this land of midnight sun in summer and perpetual darkness in winter, where temperatures can drop to -40 degrees and lower, that Yuri will spend the next 2 years as an operational fighter pilot, flying patrols along the Soviet Union's northern frontier, defending the homeland against potential incursion by NATO aircraft, though actual combat remains only a theoretical possibility during these Cold War years. Life at Losteri is harsh. The winter darkness is psychologically challenging, the kind of perpetual night that can induce depression in those not prepared for it. The cold is beyond anything Yuri experienced even during the occupation, a cold that can freeze exposed skin in minutes, that makes aircraft maintenance extraordinarily difficult, that requires special procedures for starting engines and keeping systems operational. Valentina joins him when she can, when regulations permit, when she can arrange leave from her medical training, and her presence makes the isolation more bearable, creates a small island of warmth and normalcy in the northern north. But Yuri thrives as a pilot. He logs hundreds of flight hours in the MiG-15, becoming increasingly confident, increasingly skilled, learning to handle the aircraft in all weather conditions, in all configurations, in emergency situations that test his ability to maintain control and make sound decisions under pressure. He develops a reputation among his fellow pilots as someone reliable, someone who takes safety seriously but isn't afraid to push boundaries when training requires it, someone who treats flying with the respect it demands while still finding joy in the act itself.
And then, in 1959, something extraordinary happens, something that will redirect the entire trajectory of Yuri's life, that will take him from routine fighter pilot to candidate for the most dangerous and prestigious assignment in the history of aviation. The Soviet Union announces it is looking for volunteers for a special program. The details are vague, classified, but the requirements are specific. Male, military pilot, under 30 years old, under 170 centimeters tall, weighing less than 70 kilograms, excellent physical condition, flawless medical history, impeccable political record, strong performance reviews, psychological stability, ability to withstand extreme stress. Yuri meets every single criterion. He is 5 feet 2 inches, or 157 centimeters. He weighs 69 kilograms. He is 25 years old. His medical records show no significant issues. His political reliability is beyond question. A loyal Soviet citizen, son of collective farmers,
someone who suffered under Nazi occupation and emerged committed to the communist cause. His performance reviews are uniformly excellent, and psychologically, he has demonstrated time and again his ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly in emergencies, to persist through difficult circumstances. He volunteers immediately, without fully understanding what he's volunteering for, driven by curiosity and ambition, and the sense that whatever this program is, it represents an opportunity too significant to pass up. The official explanation is minimal: a new type of flying, higher, faster, more challenging than anything he's experienced. That's all they'll say. What Yuri doesn't know yet, what he won't know for several more months, is that he has just taken the first step toward becoming a cosmonaut, toward joining an elite group that will attempt something no human being has ever attempted, toward flying not just higher and faster, but into space itself, into the void between worlds, into a realm that has existed until now only in science fiction and the dreams of visionaries who imagined a future when humans would break free from Earth's gravitational embrace. The selection process is exhaustive and exhausting. Candidates are brought to Moscow in small groups, sworn to secrecy about everything they see and hear, then subjected to batteries of tests designed to evaluate every aspect of their physical and psychological makeup. Medical examinations that examine every organ system, every physiological function with invasive thoroughness. Psychological evaluations that probe for any weakness, any instability, any trait that might prove problematic under the extreme stress of spaceflight. They are placed in centrifuges and spun until the G-forces make them weigh hundreds of kilograms, until their vision narrows to a tunnel, until they must fight to remain conscious while doctors monitor their vital signs and observe how they respond to forces that would render most people incapacitated. They are sealed in anechoic chambers, spaces of perfect silence and darkness, for hours or even days, testing whether they can endure isolation without suffering psychological breakdown, whether they can maintain their sanity when deprived of all sensory input. They are subjected to sudden temperature changes, vibrations at various frequencies, disorientation tests where they must perform tasks while being spun and tilted and confused about which direction is up. They are evaluated for their ability to solve problems under stress, to make decisions quickly, to follow instructions precisely, to work as part of a team while also demonstrating individual initiative. Out of approximately 3,000 initial candidates drawn from across the Soviet military's pilot corps, only 20 are selected for the final group. These 20 will become the first cosmonaut corps, the Vostok group, the men who will compete for the honor and danger of being the first human in space and those who will follow in subsequent missions. Yuri is one of the 20. In March of 1960, he is officially enrolled in the cosmonaut program, reassigned from his fighter squadron to this new, highly classified project that the Soviet government is pursuing with urgent intensity. The reason for the urgency is simple. The Americans are working on their own space program, the Mercury project, and Khrushchev has made it clear that the Soviet Union must be first, that the propaganda value of putting the first human in space would be enormous, that failure is unacceptable. The training takes place at a facility called Star City, located outside Moscow, a closed military installation surrounded by fences and security, where the cosmonauts will spend months preparing for missions that have never been attempted. They live in dormitories, eat in common dining halls, and spend their days in a relentless schedule of classes, simulations, physical training, and the endless repetition of procedures that must become automatic. They study orbital mechanics, learning the mathematics that describe how objects move in space, how trajectories are calculated, how the relationship between velocity and altitude determines whether a spacecraft will achieve orbit or fall back to Earth. They study astronomy, learning to recognize stars and constellations that might be used for navigation. They study the design of the Vostok spacecraft they'll eventually fly, learning every system, every backup system, every possible failure mode, and the appropriate response to each. They train in simulators, mock-ups of the Vostok capsule where they practice the procedures they'll need to execute during actual flight, launch procedures where they must monitor dozens of parameters while experiencing forces that make every movement difficult, orbital procedures where they must operate equipment while weightless, dealing with the disorientation that comes from having no clear sense of up or down, Reentry procedures where they must maintain awareness and control during the most dangerous phase of flight, when atmospheric friction turns the capsule into a fireball and G-forces multiply their body weight. And throughout all this training, evaluators watch. They observe how each cosmonaut responds to challenges, how they interact with each other, whether they show leadership qualities or prefer to follow, whether they remain calm under stress or become flustered. They take notes, compile reports, build psychological profiles that will help determine who will fly first, who will be backup, who will wait for later missions.
As the months pass, as the training becomes more intense and the launch date approaches, it becomes increasingly clear that the choice will come down to just a few candidates. Yuri is one of them. He has performed well in all aspects of training, shown no weaknesses, demonstrated the kind of calm competence that inspires confidence. The other leading candidates are German Titov, Pavel Popovich, Andrian Nikolaev, and a few others, each bringing their own strengths to the evaluation. In a secret vote among the cosmonauts themselves, asked who they would choose if the decision were theirs, Yuri receives the most votes. His peers see in him qualities that make him ideal for this historic role. He is technically proficient, but not arrogant about it. He is confident, but not reckless. He is personable, easy to work with, someone who builds team cohesion rather than creating friction. And perhaps most importantly, he has an infectious optimism, a genuine enthusiasm for the mission that makes others want to support him, want to see him succeed. The final decision is made by Sergei Korolev, the chief designer of the Soviet space program, working with Kamanin, the head of cosmonaut training, and other senior officials. They consider all the evaluations, all the test results, all the observations from months of training, and they choose Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin to be the first human to attempt spaceflight. The announcement, when it comes, is private, confined to the small circle of those directly involved in the program. German Titov will be the backup, ready to fly if anything happens to Yuri, if he becomes ill or injured, if any problem emerges that makes him unsuitable. But barring such problems, Yuri will be the one, will be first, will have his name permanently written into history as the human who opened the gateway to the stars. Yuri accepts the honor with characteristic humility, understanding the enormity of what he's being asked to do, the risks involved, the possibility that this flight might end in his death. He knows the statistics, knows that previous test flights of the Vostok system have had failures, that the technology is new and imperfectly understood, that he will essentially be a test pilot on the most dangerous test flight ever attempted. But he also understands the importance of the mission, the way it represents not just personal achievement, but a collective effort involving thousands of scientists, engineers, technicians, all working toward a goal that transcends individual glory. He sees himself as their representative, as the human face of a vast technical enterprise, as someone who has been given both an extraordinary privilege and a profound responsibility. In the months leading up to the launch, Yuri writes letters to Valentina and his daughters to be delivered only if he doesn't return. In these letters, he tries to explain why he chose to accept this mission, knowing its dangers. He writes about duty,
about the importance of pushing boundaries, about his belief that humanity's future lies in space and that someone must take the first step, no matter how dangerous that step might be. He tries to express his love for his family while also making clear that he has no regrets about this choice, that if given the option to decline, he would still say yes. These letters are sealed and placed in a secure location. Yuri hopes, of course, that they will never need to be opened, that he will return safely and can eventually share their contents with his family as evidence of what he was thinking and feeling in those final days before the flight. But their very existence speaks to the reality of the situation, the genuine possibility that April 12, 1961, might be not just the first day of the space age, but also the last day of Yuri Gagarin. And so he prepares. He reviews procedures one more time. He goes through the simulators again, practicing responses to every conceivable emergency and some that seem inconceivable. He takes care of his body, eating properly, sleeping as well as stress allows, maintaining the physical conditioning that has been so carefully developed through months of training. He says goodbye to people without saying it's goodbye, maintaining the fiction that this is just another day, another mission, though everyone involved knows it's something infinitely more significant. And on the evening of April 10, 1961, Yuri Gagarin travels to Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, to the launch pad where the rocket that will carry him into space stands vertical against the sunset, a slender arrow pointing toward the stars, a promise and a threat, beautiful and terrible in its purpose. 2 days from now, if all goes according to plan, Yuri will climb into the Vostok capsule perched atop that rocket. The engines will ignite, the hold-down bolts will release, and he will begin a journey of 108 minutes that will change everything, that will transform him from a person into a symbol, from a Soviet pilot into a universal representative of human aspiration, from Yuri Gagarin into the first, a distinction that can never be taken away, never be repeated, never be anything other than what it is, the moment when we stopped being a species confined to a single world. But before that moment, before the launch and the orbit and the return, there's this quiet evening at the Cosmodrome, with the Kazakh steppe stretching away in all directions, with the rocket standing patient and ready, with Yuri looking up at the stars and wondering what it will feel like to be among them, to see Earth from a perspective that no human eyes have ever seen, to experience weightlessness and silence and the overwhelming beauty that awaits beyond the atmosphere. He is ready. Everything that has happened in his life, every experience and lesson and moment of preparation has led him to this threshold, and tomorrow or the day after, he will cross it. The loneliness of being first is already settling on him, though he won't fully understand it until later. Because while he may fly with the support of thousands, while he may represent the collective achievement of his nation and his species, the actual experience of spaceflight will be his alone. No one can accompany him into that capsule. No one can share the sensations he will feel, the sights he will see, the terror and wonder of being the first human to leave the planet. He will be more alone than perhaps any human has ever been, separated from Earth by the void, enclosed in metal, dependent entirely on systems he cannot repair if they fail, hoping that the math is right and the engineers haven't overlooked anything critical. But he is ready for that loneliness, has been preparing for it, in a sense, his entire life. And when the moment comes, when the engines ignite and the rocket begins to rise, Yuri Gagarin will not hesitate, will not doubt, will embrace the challenge with the courage and optimism that have defined his character from the beginning. The first will always be first, and sometimes being first means being alone.
108 minutes.
The morning of April 12, 1961, arrives with a peculiar quality. The air over the Baikonur Cosmodrome carrying that crisp coolness that precedes sunrise in the Kazakh steppe. The temperature hovers just above freezing, 4 degrees Celsius, and the sky is beginning to lighten from black to deep purple, the stars fading one by one as dawn approaches. There is no wind, which is fortunate, as wind can complicate launches, can introduce instabilities during the critical moments when the rocket begins its ascent. Yuri wakes early, though he has slept reasonably well considering what lies ahead. The dormitory room is simple, functional, and he goes through his morning routine with methodical calm. He showers, shaves, eats a light breakfast of porridge and bread and tea. The food sits heavy in his stomach, not from nerves exactly, but from an awareness that his body is about to experience things no human body has experienced before, that the next meal he eats will either be a celebration or will never come at all. At 7 hours and 10 minutes before launch, the medical team performs their final checks. They take his blood pressure, listen to his heart, examine him for any sign of illness or weakness that might have developed overnight. He passes every test. His vital signs are steady, unremarkable, the body of a healthy young man in peak physical condition, betraying none of the natural anxiety that must be coursing through his mind. They help him into his pressure suit, the bright orange SK-1 that has been custom fitted to his body. The suit is bulky, restrictive, lined with ventilation tubes that will keep him cool during the intense heat of launch. Over his head goes the helmet, the visor that will protect his face, and suddenly the world becomes muffled, sounds reaching him through filters and radio speakers rather than directly. He can hear his own breathing, amplified, that rhythmic sound that will accompany him throughout the flight, a constant reminder that he is still alive, still functioning, still drawing oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide in the ancient rhythm of metabolism. There are photographs taken, of course. Gagarin in his suit, smiling that famous smile, the one that will grace 1,000 posters and stamps and magazine covers. But the smile is genuine, not forced. He is genuinely excited, genuinely honored to have this opportunity, genuinely convinced that what he is about to do matters, that it represents a step forward for humanity, not just for the Soviet Union, but for the entire species. At 5 hours and 30 minutes before launch, Yuri and his backup, German Titov, are transported to the launch pad. They travel in a bus, looking out the windows at the massive R-7 rocket standing vertical on its launch platform, a slender white and gray arrow pointing skyward, 30 meters tall, 4 strap-on boosters clustered around the central core like petals around a flower's stem. It is beautiful in its way, this machine, elegant in its engineering, terrible in its power. The Vostok capsule sits atop this rocket, a sphere of metal 2.3 meters in diameter, painted in earth tones and covered with a heat-resistant material that will protect it during re-entry. The sphere has 3 small portholes, windows through which Yuri will observe the Earth and stars, and inside is just barely enough room for one human being in a specially designed ejection seat, surrounded by the instruments and controls that may or may not be needed depending on whether the automatic systems function as designed. They take an elevator up the side of the launch tower, ascending past the boosters, past the fuel tanks filled with 400 tons of kerosene and liquid oxygen, past the engines that will soon ignite and produce thrust equivalent to the power of thousands of locomotives. At the top, technicians help Yuri transfer from the elevator platform to the capsule's entrance hatch. It is awkward work, climbing into a sphere while wearing a bulky pressure suit, maneuvering through an opening barely large enough to accommodate a human being. Inside, the capsule is cramped beyond cramped. The ejection seat has been molded to fit Yuri's exact body shape, and he settles into it now, feeling it embrace him, hold him securely. Around him are the instrument panels, circular dials and switches and indicators, everything labeled in Cyrillic, everything glowing softly in the dim light of the cabin. There is a porthole directly in front of him, giving a view of the Kazakh sky, and two more on either side of his head, allowing him to see the curve of the horizon once he reaches altitude. The technicians connect his suit to the capsule's life support systems, plugging in hoses that will provide oxygen and remove carbon dioxide, checking every connection twice, triple-checking the seals that must hold against the vacuum of space. They test the radio, making sure Yuri can hear ground control and that ground control can hear Yuri. They review the emergency procedures one final time, though there is an awareness among everyone present that many emergencies would be unsurvivable, that if certain things go wrong, there will be no time for procedures, no opportunity for rescue. And then, at 2 hours and 30 minutes before launch, the hatch is sealed. Bolts are tightened, making the sphere airtight. Yuri is now alone, truly alone, separated from the rest of humanity by metal and distance and the imminent reality of what is about to occur. Through his radio, he can hear the voices of ground control, can hear Sergei Korolev speaking to him, offering encouragement, making last-minute checks. But the voices are disembodied, ethereal, reaching him from a world he is about to leave behind. Time passes differently in the capsule. Minutes stretch and contract, sometimes crawling with agonizing slowness, sometimes racing past before he can fully register them. The countdown proceeds according to its relentless schedule, each milestone marked by announcements over the radio, by status checks, by the gradual approach to the moment of ignition.
Yuri occupies his mind by reviewing procedures, by monitoring the instruments in front of him, by reporting his status when asked. He sings to himself quietly, snatches of songs, tunes that calm his nerves and fill the silence. He thinks about Valentina and his daughters, about his mother and father, about all the people who have helped bring him to this moment. He thinks about the centuries of human history that have led to this threshold, about all the dreamers and scientists and engineers who imagined spaceflight before it was possible, who laid the theoretical and practical groundwork for this achievement. At 15 minutes before launch, the service tower is rolled back, leaving the rocket standing alone on the pad, exposed to the sky. At 10 minutes, the automatic sequencer takes over, a machine now controlling the countdown, executing commands with mechanical precision. At 5 minutes, Yuri reports that he is ready, that all systems appear nominal, that he awaits the moment of launch with confidence and calm. And then, at 0 hour 9 minutes and 7 seconds, April 12, 1961, at precisely 9 hours 7 minutes Moscow time, the engines ignite. The sound is beyond sound, beyond anything describable. It is a roar that shakes the earth, that rattles every molecule of air, that enters through the capsule walls and fills the sphere with vibrations so intense it feels like the entire structure might tear itself apart. Yuri's teeth chatter despite being clenched. His vision blurs from the shaking. The instrument panels dance in front of him, the needles on the dials oscillating wildly as the rocket strains against the hold-down clamps that keep it on the pad while the engines build to full thrust. And then, 3 seconds after ignition, the clamps release. The rocket begins to rise. "Poyekhali!" Yuri shouts into his microphone. "Let's go!" It's the phrase Russian troika drivers use to urge their horses forward, an expression of readiness, of enthusiasm, of willingness to embrace whatever comes next. And it is perfect for this moment, this transition from static to motion, from earthbound to ascending, from potential to kinetic energy released.
The acceleration builds gradually at first, then more rapidly as the rocket climbs and the fuel mass decreases. Yuri feels himself pressed back into the seat, feels his body growing heavier as the G-forces multiply. 1 G becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes 4, and climbing. His arms weigh 4 times their normal weight. His chest feels compressed, making breathing difficult. The vibration continues, a rattling, shaking sensation that makes it impossible to read the instruments clearly, that turns vision into a blur of moving shapes and dancing needles. Through his portholes, Yuri can see the launch tower falling away, can see the ground receding beneath him at incredible speed. The sky outside darkens from blue to indigo to black as he climbs through the atmosphere, ascending faster than sound, faster than any human has ever traveled in any aircraft. In just 2 minutes and 27 seconds, the 4 strap-on boosters complete their burn and separate from the central core, falling away like discarded shells, their work done. The acceleration eases slightly with the booster separation, then builds again as the second stage continues firing. Yuri's body has adjusted somewhat to the G-forces, or perhaps his mind has simply accepted them as the new normal. He manages to report his status, to confirm that he is functioning, that the capsule appears to be performing correctly, that nothing seems immediately wrong. At 4 minutes and 48 seconds into the flight, the protective shroud covering the spacecraft separates and falls away. Suddenly, instead of seeing fragments of sky through small portholes, Yuri can see much more, can see the curvature of the Earth becoming visible, can see the blue of the atmosphere thinning, can see the stars appearing even though the sun is shining because there is no longer enough air to scatter its light. At 9 minutes and 7 seconds, the second stage completes its burn. Now only the third stage is firing, the final boost that will accelerate the spacecraft to orbital velocity, to the speed required to overcome Earth's gravity and remain in stable orbit. The acceleration builds to its maximum, pressing Yuri down into his seat with forces approaching 8 times his normal weight. Everything is crushing, overwhelming, testing the absolute limits of what his body can endure. And then, at 12 minutes and 9 seconds into the flight, the engine cuts off. Instantly, completely, Yuri goes from experiencing 8 Gs to experiencing 0. Weightlessness hits him like a physical shock. His arms float up from the armrests where the G-forces had pinned them. His body lifts slightly in the restraining straps, trying to float out of the seat. Objects that had been secured by weight are now drifting, and Yuri experiences a moment of disorientation, of confusion about which direction is up, of his inner ear sending signals that don't match what his eyes are seeing. The spacecraft is in orbit, ground control announces, confirming what Yuri already knows from the sensation, from the sudden absence of weight, from the way his pencil is now floating in front of him, defying all the rules of physics that have governed his life until this moment. Everything is operating normally. Yuri looks out the porthole, and his breath catches.
The Earth spreads beneath him, vast and curved and impossibly beautiful. He can see the coastline of continents, the white swirls of clouds, the deep blue of oceans, the brown and green of land masses. He can see the thin blue line of the atmosphere, that fragile shell of air that makes life possible. So thin it looks like it could be punctured by a finger. So delicate it seems miraculous that it has persisted for billions of years. The horizon is not flat but curved, the visual proof of what he has always known intellectually but never experienced viscerally, that the Earth is a sphere, a planet, a world floating in the vastness of space. And above the curve of Earth, above the atmosphere, is blackness, infinite blackness studded with stars that do not twinkle because there is no air to distort their light, stars that shine with steady, eternal brilliance.
The Earth is blue, Yuri reports, almost in wonder. How wonderful! It is amazing. His orbit carries him across Siberia, over the Pacific, over regions he has never seen, has only studied on maps, and now he sees them from a vantage point no human has ever achieved. He sees weather systems forming over the ocean, great spiral patterns of clouds. He sees the Terminator line where day meets night, that sharp division moving across the planet's surface. He sees cities as clusters of lights beginning to appear as his orbit carries him toward the evening side of Earth. Time in orbit passes with a strange fluidity. He is supposed to complete one full circuit of the planet, which will take approximately 90 minutes, and then fire the retro rocket that will slow his velocity enough to drop out of orbit and begin the re-entry process. But 90 minutes feels both impossibly long and terrifyingly short, barely enough time to take in what he is experiencing, to process the visual and sensory information flooding his consciousness. He performs the tasks he has been trained to perform, monitoring systems, reporting his observations, testing his ability to manipulate objects in weightlessness. He eats food from tubes, finding that swallowing works normally despite the absence of gravity. He drinks water from a special container. He makes notes on a pad, finding that writing is possible, though he must hold the pad down to prevent it from floating away. And between tasks, he looks out the portholes, unable to tear his gaze away from the view of Earth from space, from this perspective that changes everything, that makes the planet seem both immense and fragile, both eternal and precarious. From up here, borders are invisible. From up here, the Cold War seems absurd. From up here, humanity is clearly one species sharing one small world in an incomprehensibly vast universe. And all the things that divide people, all the ideologies and nationalities and conflicts seem trivial in the face of this ultimate perspective. But Yuri cannot linger in philosophical reflection. The orbital mechanics are inexorable, the trajectory calculated long before launch. As he crosses over Africa, approaching the point where the retro burn must occur, ground control gives him the command to prepare for re-entry. The automatic system should handle this, firing the retro rocket at precisely the correct moment to begin the descent, but Yuri must be ready to take manual control if the automation fails. At 42 minutes into the flight, the retro rocket fires. Yuri feels the acceleration, modest compared to launch but unmistakable, slowing the spacecraft, dropping it out of its stable orbit. The burn lasts for 40 seconds, enough to reduce his velocity by sufficient margin that Earth's gravity can reclaim him, can pull him back down through the atmosphere toward the surface. Now comes the most dangerous part of the journey, the phase that has killed test pilots in experimental aircraft, the re-entry that subjects the spacecraft and its occupant to tremendous heat and deceleration forces. The instrument module, which has been attached to the spherical re-entry capsule throughout the flight, is supposed to separate now, leaving only the heat-shielded sphere to descend through the atmosphere. But something goes wrong. The module does not separate cleanly. It remains partially attached, connected by cables that were supposed to be severed, creating an asymmetric shape that begins to tumble as it encounters the upper atmosphere. Yuri feels the spacecraft start to spin, slowly at first, and then with increasing violence, the centrifugal forces making his body heavy again, making the cabin rotate around him in a sickening whirl. For 8 minutes, the spacecraft tumbles out of control, spinning end over end through the thin upper atmosphere. Yuri experiences G-forces that vary wildly as the spin continues, now heavy, now light, now heavy again in a rhythm that threatens to overwhelm his senses, to induce nausea and disorientation and potentially unconsciousness. He fights to remain aware, to monitor what information he can from the spinning instrument panels, to report his status, even though his voice is strained by the forces acting on his body.
Then, suddenly, at around 7,000 meters altitude, the connecting cables finally burn through from the intense heat of reentry. The instrument module falls away, and the spherical capsule, its center of gravity properly positioned, immediately orients itself with the heat shield facing downward, the correct configuration for the final descent. The deceleration forces build to their maximum. Yuri weighs 8 times normal, his body crushed into the seat, his vision tunneling, every breath and effort against the weight of his own chest. Outside the portholes, he can see the glow of plasma, the air itself heating to incandescence as the capsule plunges through it at thousands of kilometers per hour, the heat shield ablating, burning away its outer layers to dissipate the thermal energy that would otherwise vaporize the spacecraft and its occupant. At 7,000 meters, right on schedule, the hatch above Yuri's head blows away with an explosive charge. Instantly, he and his ejection seat are catapulted out of the capsule by powerful rockets, separating from the sphere that will land separately by parachute. The ejection is violent, a shock of acceleration that drives Yuri upward and away from the falling capsule, and for a moment he is simply falling, tumbling through the air at terminal velocity, the ground approaching with terrifying speed. Then the drogue parachute deploys, jerking him upright, slowing his descent. At 4,000 meters, the main parachute opens with a crack and a bloom of orange fabric, and suddenly Yuri is descending peacefully, drifting down through the morning air over the Saratov region, not far from where he first learned to fly years ago in the Aero Club. The landing is harder than he would like, a solid impact with plowed earth that jars his bones and leaves him momentarily stunned. But he is alive. He is down. He has completed the journey, has flown into space and returned, has become the first human being in history to leave the planet and come back safely. He lies there for a moment, still strapped to his seat, breathing hard, feeling the solid ground beneath him, feeling Earth's gravity pulling on his body with familiar, reassuring weight. His heart is pounding, adrenaline surging through his system, and he is laughing, almost crying, overwhelmed by relief and joy and the simple, impossible fact that he survived. That 108 minutes ago, he was sitting on top of a rocket, and now he is lying in a field, breathing Russian air, under a Russian sky, on a Russian spring morning. He releases the parachute harness, struggles out of the ejection seat, and stands on unsteady legs. In the distance, he can see a woman and a young girl approaching, locals from a nearby collective farm who heard the sonic booms of his re-entry and came to investigate. They stop when they see him in his bright orange suit and helmet, clearly unsure what to make of this strange figure who has apparently fallen from the sky. Yuri opens his helmet and calls out, "Don't be afraid. I am a Soviet citizen like you who has descended from space. I must find a telephone to call Moscow." The woman, Anna Takhtarova, will later describe her first impression of the world's first spaceman. He was short, in an unusual bright orange suit, and he looked very young, almost like a boy. She and her granddaughter, Rita, had been planting potatoes when they saw the parachutes descending, and now here was this strange figure asking to use a phone, claiming to have come from space. Within minutes, locals from the nearby village of Smilovka arrive, having also witnessed the landing. Word spreads rapidly. Someone runs to call the authorities to report that Gagarin has landed safely, that the mission is a success. Within an hour, military helicopters will arrive to retrieve him, to transport him to an airbase for debriefing and medical examination, and then to Moscow for the celebrations that will transform him from Yuri Gagarin, fighter pilot and cosmonaut, to Yuri Gagarin, international celebrity, symbol of Soviet achievement, the first human being in space. But for now, in this quiet moment before the chaos descends, Yuri stands in a field of spring earth, feeling the sun on his face, breathing air that tastes impossibly sweet after hours of recycled oxygen, and allows himself to simply exist in the aftermath of the impossible. He has done it. They have done it. Humanity has taken its first step off the planet that gave it birth, and nothing will ever be quite the same again.
The transformation begins almost immediately, though Yuri cannot yet grasp its full scope or permanence. Within hours of landing, he is no longer simply a person, but a symbol, a representation of Soviet technological prowess, a living embodiment of communist idealism, a tool of propaganda more valuable than any weapon, any industrial achievement, any political victory. 2 days after the flight, on April 14th, Moscow celebrates. The entire city seems to have emptied into the streets, millions of people lining the route from Vnukovo Airport to Red Square, desperate for a glimpse of the man who has touched the stars. Yuri rides in an open-top car through this human sea, and the sound is deafening, a roar of approval and admiration and national pride that washes over him in overwhelming waves. People throw flowers, they weep, they chant his name. Children are held up on parents' shoulders to see him pass. Banners hang from every building, slogans proclaiming the victory of Soviet science, the superiority of the socialist system, the dawn of the space age. It is celebration on a scale matched only by the victory parades after World War II, and Yuri is at the center of it, standing in the car waving, smiling that famous smile that will grace 1 million photographs, trying to appear worthy of this adulation, while privately feeling overwhelmed, slightly fraudulent, wondering if he really deserves this level of worship for doing what any of the other cosmonauts could have done. In Red Square, before the Kremlin walls, Premier Nikita Khrushchev personally awards Yuri the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor the nation can bestow. There are speeches, many speeches, officials taking turns praising the achievement, praising the young cosmonaut, praising the system that made such accomplishment possible. Yuri is expected to speak as well, to say something profound, something memorable, something worthy of the historic moment. He keeps it simple. He thanks the Communist Party, as is expected. He thanks the scientists and engineers who designed and built the spacecraft. He thanks his fellow cosmonauts who trained alongside him. He expresses hope that his flight represents the beginning of human expansion into space, not an ending, that others will follow and go further, that humanity's future lies among the stars. His words are modest, appropriate, and they are received with thunderous approval. But this is only the beginning of the celebration, only the start of what will become a life fundamentally altered, constrained, transformed by the burden of being first. In the weeks that follow, Yuri begins a tour of the Soviet Union that will take him to dozens of cities, from Leningrad to Vladivostok, from Murmansk to Tashkent. Everywhere he goes, the pattern repeats: massive crowds, official ceremonies, speeches, photo opportunities, appearances at factories and schools and collective farms. He is expected to be always on, always smiling, always representing the ideal Soviet citizen, modest yet confident, patriotic yet humble, a man of the people who has achieved the extraordinary. The demands are relentless. Days begin early and end late,
filled with appearances and meetings and ceremonies that blend together into an exhausting blur. There is no privacy, no opportunity to simply be Yuri Gagarin, rather than Yuri Gagarin, hero of the Soviet Union, first man in space. Even sleep becomes difficult, his mind too stimulated by the constant activity, his body clock disrupted by travel across time zones, his dreams filled with crowds and cameras and endless expectations. And then come the international tours. In late April of 1961, barely 2 weeks after his flight, Yuri embarks on a journey that will take him to more than 30 countries over the next 2 years. He is the Soviet Union's ambassador to the world, proof that communism can achieve what capitalism cannot, demonstration that the socialist system produces not just industrial output, but human excellence, scientific advancement, the capacity to reach beyond Earth itself. He visits Czechoslovakia first, where President Antonín Novotný receives him at the site of the Golden Star, awarding him the Czechoslovak Socialist Hero of Labor Medal. The Prague crowds are enormous, enthusiastic, treating Yuri with a warmth that surprises him, that makes him realize his achievement has resonated beyond Soviet borders, has captured imaginations everywhere. He visits Finland and Sweden, Norway and Iceland, and everywhere the response is similar. Massive public interest, endless questions, the desire to touch him, to be near him, to somehow share in what he represents. In July, he visits Great Britain, a capitalist nation, technically an ideological enemy, yet the British embrace him with surprising enthusiasm. In London, he meets Prime Minister Harold Macmillan at Admiralty House, the two men discussing space exploration in carefully diplomatic terms. But the meeting that will stay with Yuri is at the Metropolitan Vickers Engineering Plant in Manchester, where the Amalgamated Union of Foundry Workers has invited him. Before he was a pilot, before he was a cosmonaut, Yuri was an apprentice foundryman at the Lubbertsy steel plant. The Manchester foundry workers remember this, embrace him as one of their own, and Yuri feels, perhaps for the first time since the flight, like something close to his true self. These are working men, people who understand labor and skill and the dignity of making things with your hands. They present him with a medal inscribed, "Together we shall mold a better world." And Yuri will later say that this gift moved him more than many of the official state honors he received.
During that Manchester visit, it rains heavily, a typical British downpour, and Yuri is riding in an open-top Rolls-Royce through streets lined with people who have been standing in the weather for hours to see him. His handlers want to raise the roof to protect him from the rain, but Yuri refuses. "Surely the least I can do is get wet too," he says, standing in the rain, waving to the crowds who cheer even louder when they realize he is willing to share their discomfort. He visits Brazil, where President Jânio Quadros decorates him with the Order of Aeronautical Merit. He visits Cuba, where Fidel Castro embraces him as a revolutionary hero, symbol of what the socialist world can achieve. He visits Canada and Mexico, Ghana and Egypt, India and Afghanistan, Japan and Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria and Hungary and Poland, a whirlwind of airports and ceremonies and speeches and photo opportunities that never seems to end. In Egypt, President Gamal Abdel Nasser awards him the Order of the Nile and presents him with symbolic keys to the gates of Cairo and Alexandria. Yuri visits the pyramids of Giza, standing at the base of those ancient monuments and reflecting on the long arc of human achievement, on how the same species that built these structures has now reached into space. He visits the Aswan Dam, constructed with Soviet assistance, symbol of the modernization that Soviet technology promises to bring to developing nations. In India, he meets Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and tours the country extensively,
visiting not just cities, but villages, meeting ordinary Indians, showing interest in their lives and customs. Yuri has developed a genuine curiosity about the world beyond the Soviet Union, a desire to understand different cultures, different ways of living. The tours are exhausting, but they are also educational, exposing him to the diversity of human civilization in ways that the circumscribed life of a Soviet fighter pilot never could. In Japan, crowds numbering in the tens of thousands greet him at Tokyo's airfield, chanting "Banzai, Gagarin." The Japanese people, who had seen their country devastated by war just 16 years earlier, embraced the space program as a symbol of peaceful achievement, proof that human ingenuity can reach toward the stars rather than destroying itself. When Yuri visits a Minota photo shop, the company presents him with a complete set of photographic equipment as he leaves, a gift he treasures because it allows him to document his travels, to capture images of the world he is seeing. But beneath the celebrations, beneath the constant smile and the gracious acceptance of honors, a tension is building. Yuri Gagarin, the person, is disappearing, being slowly erased by Yuri Gagarin, the symbol. His days are not his own. His schedule is determined by others, by officials who see him as an asset to be deployed, a resource to be utilized for maximum propaganda effect. His opinions, when he expresses them, must align with official policy. His appearance must be perfect, his behavior exemplary, his words carefully chosen to reflect well on the Soviet state. Air Force Colonel General Nikolai Kamanin, who accompanies Yuri on many of the foreign trips, later writes in his diary about observing the cosmonaut during these exhausting tours. "Every day I talked with this great man in the midst of unprecedented luxury and splendor, and saw that he just wanted to relax, alone, somewhere with a fishing rod on a river outside Moscow." Kamanin recognizes what the constant public exposure is doing to Yuri, how it drains him, how it transforms what should be joy and pride into something more complicated, more burdensome. There are moments when the strain shows. In September 1961, while recovering from a minor boating accident at a Black Sea resort, Yuri is reportedly discovered by his wife Valentina during a liaison with a nurse. In an attempt to escape through a window to avoid a confrontation, he jumps from a second-floor balcony, leaving him with a permanent scar above his left eyebrow. The incident is hushed up, kept from public knowledge, because the image of the hero cosmonaut must remain unblemished, perfect, above reproach. But it reveals the pressure Yuri is under, the impossible expectations, the way his private life has become public property, scrutinized and controlled. And then there is perhaps the most painful restriction of all, the decision that Yuri Gagarin will never fly in space again. The official explanation is that he is too valuable to risk, that as the first man in space, he represents something irreplaceable, that losing him in another mission would be a propaganda disaster the Soviet Union cannot afford. The Vostok program will continue. Other cosmonauts will fly, but Yuri will remain on the ground, watching his colleagues do what he longs to do, prevented from pursuing the activity that gave meaning to his achievement in the first place. German Titov flies 4 months after Yuri, spending an entire day in orbit, experiencing space sickness, the first human to discover that the inner ear can rebel against weightlessness, that nausea can strike even in the absence of gravity. Andrian Nikolaev and Pavel Popovich fly simultaneously in Vostok 3 and 4, demonstrating the possibility of coordinating multiple spacecraft. Valentina Tereshkova becomes the first woman in space in 1963, orbiting for nearly 3 days. Yuri watches these flights, celebrates them publicly, congratulates his colleagues genuinely, because he understands what they are experiencing, what they are achieving. But privately, he aches. He wants to fly again, wants to experience weightlessness, wants to see Earth from orbit with the wisdom gained from years of reflecting on his first flight. He lobbies officials, argues that the risk is justified, that other missions require his experience and skill. But the answer is always the same: too valuable, too important, too risky. So he is given other roles. He is made Deputy Training Director for the Cosmonaut Corps, a position that allows him to contribute to the program while keeping him safely on the ground. He helps train the new cosmonauts who enter the program, passing on his knowledge and experience, trying to prepare them for what they will encounter in space. He is good at this work, patient and thorough, genuinely wanting his colleagues to succeed. But it is not flying, and nothing can fully replace the thing he wants most. He enrolls at the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy, pursuing advanced studies in aerospace engineering, trying to fill his time with intellectual challenges, with deeper understanding of the systems and physics that make spaceflight possible. He attacks his studies with characteristic thoroughness, spending long hours on mathematics and engineering principles, writing papers, taking examinations. In 1968, he will graduate with honors, demonstrating that he is more than just a pilot with good reflexes, that he has the theoretical knowledge to match his practical skills. But even as he studies, even as he trains others, even as he fulfills his endless obligations as hero of the Soviet Union, making appearances and giving speeches and representing the space program at countless official functions, Yuri never stops hoping that he will fly again. He maintains his fitness, keeps his pilot skills sharp by flying jets whenever regulations permit, stays ready for the call that might come, the mission that might need him. The years pass. Yuri ages from his mid-20s into his 30s, still young, still physically capable, but watching time slip away, watching opportunities go to others. He maintains his public face, the charm and smile, the gracious acceptance of honors, the willingness to shake another hand, pose for another photograph, give another interview. But those close to him see the frustration, the sense of being trapped, of being defined entirely by one accomplishment, 108 minutes that was supposed to be the beginning of a career in space, but instead became its entirety. The burden of being first, it turns out, is not the danger of the flight or the physical challenges of spaceflight. It is the afterward, the endless afterward, when your achievement becomes everyone else's property, when you cease to belong to yourself and instead become a national treasure, an icon to be preserved and displayed and prevented from taking the risks that made you worthy of celebration in the first place.
In 1967, something happens that will haunt Yuri Gagarin for the rest of his life, that will place on his shoulders a burden of guilt and grief that no amount of public adulation can ease. Vladimir Komarov, his friend, his fellow cosmonaut, someone he has known for years, someone whose family has shared dinners with Yuri's family, dies in what should have been a triumph, but becomes instead a tragedy, born of political pressure and rushed timelines and the unwillingness of officials to delay a mission they know is dangerous. The plan had seemed ambitious but achievable. Soyuz 1 would launch with Komarov alone aboard, establishing orbit. The next day, Soyuz 2 would launch with 3 cosmonauts, Alexei Leonov, Yevgeny Krunov, and Valery Bukovsky. The 2 spacecraft would rendezvous in orbit. 2 cosmonauts would perform a spacewalk from one vehicle to the other, demonstrating the capability for crew transfer that would be essential for eventual lunar missions. It would be a spectacular achievement, a demonstration of Soviet capabilities timed to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. But the Soyuz spacecraft was not ready. Engineers knew this. They had compiled lists of problems, technical issues that needed resolution before the spacecraft could safely fly with crew aboard. The environmental control system had deficiencies. The parachute deployment mechanism showed inconsistencies during testing. The communication systems were unreliable. The solar panels that would provide power in orbit had deployment issues. The list went on. 203 separate problems documented by the engineers who built the spacecraft and understood its limitations. But political pressure overrode technical concerns. The anniversary was coming. The Americans were making progress on their own lunar program. The Soviet leadership demanded success, demanded demonstration that the space program could still achieve firsts, could still prove Soviet technological superiority. And so the mission was approved despite the engineers' warnings, despite the knowledge that cosmonauts would be flying in a spacecraft that was not truly ready. Yuri knew this. Komarov knew this. Everyone involved in the program knew this. And there is a story, impossible to verify completely, but told by multiple sources, that Yuri tried to prevent the mission, or at least tried to replace Komarov as the primary pilot. According to this account, Yuri went to officials and demanded to be assigned to Soyuz 1, using his status as hero of the Soviet Union to argue that if someone must fly this dangerous mission, it should be him, not Komarov, who had a family, who had so much to lose. But whether this story is true or embellished, whether Yuri actually made this attempt, or whether it exists only as legend, the outcome was the same. Komarov flew. On April 23, 1967, Soyuz 1 launched from Baikonur with Vladimir Komarov aboard, and almost immediately problems began manifesting themselves. One of the two solar panels failed to deploy properly, cutting the spacecraft's power generation in half. Communications became intermittent, making it difficult for Komarov to receive instructions or report his status clearly. The attitude control system malfunctioned, making it nearly impossible to orient the spacecraft properly, causing it to tumble and spin. The cabin temperature began rising as environmental systems struggled to cope with the reduced power availability. Komarov worked to solve each problem as it arose, methodically trying procedures, attempting manual control when systems failed, maintaining his composure even as it became clear that the mission was deteriorating rapidly. After 17 orbits, after nearly a full day in space, fighting with a spacecraft that was actively trying to kill him, ground control made the decision to abort the mission and bring Komarov home. The re-entry began nominally. The Soyuz descent module separated from the other sections and oriented itself properly for the plunge through the atmosphere. The heat shield did its job, protecting Komarov from the plasma that surrounded the spacecraft as it decelerated from orbital velocity. At 7,000 meters altitude, the drogue parachute deployed as designed, stabilizing the capsule's descent. But then, the main parachute, the large canopy that should have opened fully and slowed the descent to a survivable speed, failed to deploy properly. The parachute lines became tangled, twisted, preventing the canopy from fully inflating. Komarov, in his descent module, was now falling toward the Earth at terminal velocity with no functioning parachute, no way to slow down, no possibility of survival.
In 1967, something happens that will haunt Yuri Gagarin for the rest of his life, that will place on his shoulders a burden of guilt and grief that no amount of public adulation can ease. Vladimir Komarov, his friend, his fellow cosmonaut, someone he has known for years, someone whose family has shared dinners with Yuri's family,
dies in what should have been a triumph, but becomes instead a tragedy, born of political pressure and rushed timelines and the unwillingness of officials to delay a mission they know is dangerous. The plan had seemed ambitious but achievable. Soyuz 1 would launch with Komarov alone aboard, establishing orbit. The next day, Soyuz 2 would launch with 3 cosmonauts, Alexei Leonov, Yevgeny Krunov, and Valery Bukovsky. The 2 spacecraft would rendezvous in orbit. 2 cosmonauts would perform a spacewalk from one vehicle to the other, demonstrating the capability for crew transfer that would be essential for eventual lunar missions. It would be a spectacular achievement, a demonstration of Soviet capabilities timed to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. But the Soyuz spacecraft was not ready. Engineers knew this. They had compiled lists of problems, technical issues that needed resolution before the spacecraft could safely fly with crew aboard. The environmental control system had deficiencies. The parachute deployment mechanism showed inconsistencies during testing. The communication systems were unreliable. The solar panels that would provide power in orbit had deployment issues. The list went on. 203 separate problems documented by the engineers who built the spacecraft and understood its limitations. But political pressure overrode technical concerns. The anniversary was coming. The Americans were making progress on their own lunar program. The Soviet leadership demanded success, demanded demonstration that the space program could still achieve firsts, could still prove Soviet technological superiority. And so the mission was approved despite the engineers' warnings, despite the knowledge that cosmonauts would be flying in a spacecraft that was not truly ready. Yuri knew this. Komarov knew this. Everyone involved in the program knew this. And there is a story, impossible to verify completely, but told by multiple sources, that Yuri tried to prevent the mission, or at least tried to replace Komarov as the primary pilot. According to this account, Yuri went to officials and demanded to be assigned to Soyuz 1, using his status as hero of the Soviet Union to argue that if someone must fly this dangerous mission, it should be him, not Komarov, who had a family, who had so much to lose. But whether this story is true or embellished, whether Yuri actually made this attempt, or whether it exists only as legend, the outcome was the same. Komarov flew. On April 23, 1967, Soyuz 1 launched from Baikonur with Vladimir Komarov aboard, and almost immediately problems began manifesting themselves. One of the 2 solar panels failed to deploy properly, cutting the spacecraft's power generation in half. Communications became intermittent, making it difficult for Komarov to receive instructions or report his status clearly. The attitude control system malfunctioned, making it nearly impossible to orient the spacecraft properly, causing it to tumble and spin. The cabin temperature began rising as environmental systems struggled to cope with the reduced power availability. Komarov worked to solve each problem as it arose, methodically trying procedures, attempting manual control when systems failed, maintaining his composure even as it became clear that the mission was deteriorating rapidly. After 17 orbits, after nearly a full day in space, fighting with a spacecraft that was actively trying to kill him, ground control made the decision to abort the mission and bring Komarov home. The re-entry began nominally. The Soyuz descent module separated from the other sections and oriented itself properly for the plunge through the atmosphere. The heat shield did its job, protecting Komarov from the plasma that surrounded the spacecraft as it decelerated from orbital velocity. At 7,000 meters altitude, the drogue parachute deployed as designed, stabilizing the capsule's descent. But then, the main parachute, the large canopy that should have opened fully and slowed the descent to a survivable speed, failed to deploy properly. The parachute lines became tangled, twisted, preventing the canopy from fully inflating. Komarov, in his descent module, was now falling toward the Earth at terminal velocity with no functioning parachute, no way to slow down, no possibility of survival.
They walked out to their aircraft, MiG-15 UTI number 18, conducting their external inspection, checking control surfaces, looking for any obvious problems, anything that might make the aircraft unsafe. Everything appeared normal, routine, exactly as it should be. They climbed into the cockpit, Seryogin in the rear seat, Yuri in the front, and began the startup sequence, the familiar ritual of bringing a jet engine to life, checking instruments, verifying systems. At 10 hours and 18 minutes Moscow time, they received clearance from the control tower and began their takeoff roll. The MiG-15 UTI accelerated down the runway, its engine producing the characteristic howl of the early jet age, and lifted off smoothly, climbing into the overcast sky. Ground control tracked them on radar, watched as they climbed to their designated training altitude, as they began the series of maneuvers outlined in their flight plan. Everything appeared normal. Radio communications were routine, calm, professional. The aircraft was responding properly to control inputs, performing as expected. For approximately 20 minutes, the flight proceeded without incident, just another training sortie, unremarkable, ordinary. And then, at 10 hours and 30 minutes Moscow time, contact was lost. The MiG-15 UTI disappeared from radar. Radio calls went unanswered. The aircraft and its two occupants simply vanished from the sky, from electronic detection, from all communication, as if they had ceased to exist. Search efforts began immediately. Other aircraft were scrambled to search the area where the MiG had last been detected. Ground teams were mobilized, spreading out across the forest region southeast of Moscow, where the aircraft had been operating. The search was urgent, desperate, driven by the slim hope that there had been an ejection, that Yuri and Seryogin might have survived, might be on the ground waiting for rescue. But the hope was slim because there had been no emergency call, no declaration of a problem, no indication that the crew had time to attempt ejection. One moment they were flying normally, the next moment they were gone. The silence itself suggested something catastrophic, something that happened too quickly for response. The wreckage was found that afternoon in a forest near the village of Novoselovo, approximately 65 kilometers from the airbase. The impact site was a crater surrounded by scattered debris, pieces of aircraft spread across a wide area, trees sheared off by the falling wreckage, the ground torn and blackened. There was no question of survivors. The impact had been at high speed, nearly vertical, the aircraft essentially disintegrating on contact with the ground. The bodies of Yuri Gagarin and Vladimir Seryogin were found in the wreckage, identifiable only through forensic analysis, through dental records and other methods, their remains so fragmentary that there could be no open casket funeral, no final viewing, only closed urns containing ashes and fragments carried in solemn procession to Red Square for burial in the Kremlin wall. The Soviet Union went into mourning. The loss of Gagarin was not just the death of a man, but the extinguishing of a symbol, the silencing of a voice that had represented hope and achievement and the promise of humanity's future in space. State television interrupted regular programming to announce his death. Factories and offices and schools observed moments of silence. Flags flew at half-mast.
Millions of people who had never met Gagarin, who knew him only through photographs and news reports, wept genuinely for a loss that felt personal, intimate, as if someone they knew had died. The funeral on March 30th was massive, attended by Soviet leadership, cosmonauts past and present, dignitaries from around the world, and hundreds of thousands of ordinary citizens who lined the route to Red Square, who stood in the cold March wind to pay their respects to the man who had touched the stars and now returned to Earth for the final time. Valentina Gagarina, Yuri's widow, stood at the ceremony with her daughters Yelena and Galia, aged 8 and 7, too young to fully understand what had happened, why their father would not be coming home, why this crowd had gathered, why everyone was so sad. She wore black, her face composed, though her eyes betrayed the depth of her grief, and when the urn containing her husband's remains was placed in its niche in the Kremlin wall, she placed flowers with hands that trembled only slightly, maintaining the dignity that was expected, that Yuri would have wanted.
Speeches were given, praising Gagarin's achievements, his character, his service to the nation. Korolev's widow attended, though Korolev himself had died 2 years earlier, taking with him much of the creative genius that had driven the early Soviet space program. The cosmonauts who had trained with Yuri, who had flown in missions after him, stood at attention, bearing witness to the loss of one of their own, understanding perhaps better than anyone else what had been taken, what potential would now never be realized. And in the weeks and months that followed, as official investigations examined the crash, trying to understand what had happened, trying to determine cause so that future accidents might be prevented, speculation ran wild. There were theories about mechanical failure, about structural problems with the aging MiG-15. There were theories about weather, about the aircraft entering a spin in the clouds and the crew being unable to recover before ground impact. There were theories about wake turbulence from another aircraft, about a near miss that forced evasive action that went wrong. There were even conspiracy theories, whispers of sabotage or assassination, though these had no evidence to support them, and said more about the suspicious mindset of the Cold War era than about any actual plot. The truth, as official investigations eventually concluded, was likely more prosaic, more typical of aviation accidents throughout history. A combination of factors, weather, and possibly another aircraft's proximity, and the limitations of the older MiG-15's instrumentation, creating a situation that developed too quickly for even experienced pilots to recover from. The final report would cite flight in adverse meteorological conditions as a contributing factor, along with possible abrupt maneuvering to avoid a collision or to escape from clouds, but many details remained unclear, lost in the violence of the impact that destroyed the aircraft and killed its crew. What is certain is that on March 27, 1968, the world lost Yuri Gagarin at age 34, far too young, with so much life still ahead of him, so many flights he might have made, so many things he might have accomplished. The boy from Klushino, the foundryman's apprentice, the fighter pilot from Lustari, the cosmonaut who opened the gateway to space, was gone. His story ended not in the dramatic violence of spacecraft failure, but in the routine tragedy of an aircraft accident, the kind that has claimed countless pilots throughout aviation history. He left behind a widow and 2 daughters. He left behind colleagues who would continue the space program he had helped initiate. He left behind millions of people around the world who had been inspired by his achievement, who had seen in his flight proof that humanity could transcend its earthly limitations. And he left behind a question that can never be answered.
What might he have done if he had lived? Would he have returned to space as planned? Would he have commanded missions to space stations, perhaps even flown to the moon if the Soviet program had landed cosmonauts there? Would he have transitioned into administrative roles, shaping the space program from behind the scenes? Would he have eventually retired from active service and lived out his years telling stories of the early space age to grandchildren? We cannot know. We have only what was, not what might have been. 108 minutes in space on April 12, 1961. 34 years of life, a smile that charmed the world, a courage that opened new frontiers, and then silence. The silence of the forest where his aircraft fell, the silence of a life cut short, the silence that follows all lives eventually, but came far too early for Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin.
The asteroids wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human achievement and tragedy, continuing their slow dance across the cosmos as they have for billions of years and will for billions more. On Earth, in the decades since that March morning when Yuri Gagarin's aircraft fell, the world has changed in ways both profound and subtle. The Soviet Union that he represented, that claimed him as its hero, dissolved in 1991, fragmenting into independent nations, ending the Cold War that provided context for so much of the space race. The space program continued, of course. Humans returned to space again and again, building space stations where crews could live for months, conducting experiments, learning how to exist in microgravity for extended periods. Americans walked on the moon, achieving the goal that Kennedy had set, fulfilling the dream that drove so much of the competition between East and West. Robotic probes explored every planet in the solar system, sent back images and data that revealed the solar system's diversity and wonder. And yet, for all that has been accomplished, for all the missions that have followed and will follow, Yuri Gagarin remains unique. He was first. That distinction can never be taken away, never be repeated, never be anything other than what it is. Every human who has flown in space since April 12, 1961, every astronaut and cosmonaut who has looked down on Earth from orbit, who has experienced weightlessness and seen the thin blue line of atmosphere, has followed the path that Yuri opened. His legacy is preserved in countless ways. Statues of Gagarin stand in cities across what was once the Soviet Union and in many other nations as well. Streets and squares bear his name. The launch pad from which Vostok 1 lifted off at Baikonur Cosmodrome is now called Gagarin's Start, and cosmonauts launching from that pad follow traditions established in honor of the first spaceman. They visit Gagarin's office at Star City, signing the visitor's book, touching objects he once touched, connecting themselves to that historic lineage. The town where he grew up, Gzhatsk, was renamed Gagarin in 1968, shortly after his death, and remains so to this day. The house where he lived as a child is now a museum, preserved much as it was during his youth, a reminder of humble origins, of the improbable journey from collective farm to cosmic orbit. The Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center, officially established in 1960, is the facility where Russian cosmonauts train to this day, where they learn the systems and procedures, where they prepare mentally and physically for the rigors of spaceflight, walking in the footsteps of that first class of 20 cosmonauts who dared to imagine leaving Earth entirely. Every year on April 12th, now designated as International Day of Human Spaceflight by the United Nations, people around the world celebrate Yuri's achievement, remembering not just what he did, but what it represented.
The flight of Vostok 1 demonstrated that humans were not forever bound to Earth, that the species could expand beyond its home world, that the frontier was not closed, but opening, infinite in scope and possibility. But perhaps the most powerful testament to Yuri's legacy is found not in monuments or official commemorations, but in the continued human presence in space. At this very moment, as you listen to these words, human beings are living aboard the International Space Station, orbiting Earth every 90 minutes, seeing 16 sunrises and sunsets every day, conducting research, maintaining systems, living in the environment that Gagarin first entered for 108 minutes. These crews come from multiple nations, speak different languages, represent different cultures, but they share something fundamental. They are all descendants of Yuri, inheritors of what he began, proof that his achievement was not an ending, but a beginning, not a destination, but the first step on a journey that continues and will continue as long as humans remain curious about what lies beyond the horizon. And if we step back, if we try to understand what Yuri's story means beyond the specifics of rockets and spacecraft, beyond the Cold War context and the propaganda value and all the complications that surrounded the achievement, we find something profound about the human condition itself. We find the story of someone who faced immense challenges early in life, who survived occupation and hunger and loss, who emerged from hardship with determination rather than despair, who chose to look upward rather than downward, who found in the sky not a barrier but an invitation. We find the story of someone who worked tirelessly to develop skills, who progressed from apprentice foundryman to jet pilot through dedication and persistence, who seized opportunities when they appeared and prepared himself to be worthy of them, who understood that achievement requires both talent and tremendous effort. We find the story of someone who faced fear with courage, who accepted a mission knowing it might kill him, who sat atop a rocket, uncertain whether it would carry him to orbit or explode beneath him, who chose to go forward anyway because the goal seemed worth the risk, because someone had to be first, because he believed the human future lay in space and was willing to stake his life on that belief. We find the story of friendship and loss, of watching colleagues fly the missions he longed to fly, of seeing his friend Komarov die in a preventable accident, of carrying survivor's guilt alongside public adulation, of understanding viscerally that achievement and tragedy are often intertwined, that progress demands sacrifice, that not everyone who reaches the stars survives the attempt. And we find the story of mortality, of a life cut short at 34, of potential that will never be realized, of questions that will never be answered, of the fundamental human reality that we cannot control when our time ends, that death comes when it comes, regardless of plans or hopes, or the work that remains undone.
But through it all, through the complications and contradictions, through the public triumph and private struggles, Yuri Gagarin's essential quality remained constant. He was, by all accounts, a genuinely good person. Modest without being self-effacing, confident without arrogance, brave without recklessness, ambitious without ruthlessness, the kind of person who made others want to help him succeed, who brought out the best in those around him, who used his fame not for personal aggrandizement, but to advance the causes he believed in. His smile was not a performance, but genuine expression of someone who found joy in flying, in achievement, in the simple experience of being alive. His optimism was not naivete, but a conscious choice to believe in human possibility. to trust that despite all our flaws and failings, humans could accomplish extraordinary things when we worked together toward common goals. In this sense, Yuri Gagarin was the perfect person to be first, not because he was superhuman or perfect or without flaws, but because he was authentically human in the best sense, representing what we can be at our finest, showing what ordinary people can achieve through dedication and courage and the willingness to dream large dreams. The loneliness of being first, that burden we spoke of at the beginning, was real. No one could accompany him into the Vostok capsule. No one could share the precise sensations he felt, the exact thoughts he thought, the specific wonder and terror of being humanity's sole representative beyond the atmosphere. He went alone into that new realm, bearing the hopes of millions, carrying the weight of his nation's prestige, risking his life for achievements that would benefit everyone but could be experienced directly only by him. But he did not stay alone for long. Others followed, building on what he achieved, expanding human presence in space, demonstrating that Vostok 1 was not an anomaly, but the beginning of sustained exploration, the opening of a frontier that remains open, that calls to each new generation, that invites humanity to continue expanding outward, seeking answers to questions we haven't yet learned to ask. The first will always be first. That is Yuri's gift to us, his permanent place in history, his achievement that cannot be diminished or erased regardless of what comes after. He was the human who showed it could be done, who proved that Earth's gravity could be overcome, who demonstrated that space was not a barrier, but a realm humans could enter and, crucially, return from safely. But perhaps the greater gift is the example he set through how he lived, how he carried his achievement, how he remained essentially himself despite the pressures that might have transformed him into something else. He showed that it's possible to be extraordinary without ceasing to be ordinary, to achieve greatness without losing humanity, to become a symbol while remaining a person. As you drift now towards sleep, as these words fade and your consciousness begins its own journey into the personal space of dreams, carry with you, if you wish, this image, a young man from a small village looking up at the sky, seeing not a limit but a promise, not an ending but a beginning, not a ceiling but a door that swings open if only someone has the courage to push. Carry with you the knowledge that Yuri Gagarin was real, was human, was someone who felt fear and chose courage, who faced the unknown and stepped forward, who accepted the burden of being first because someone had to be first, because humanity's future required it, because the stars were waiting and had waited for billions of years and were ready finally to receive visitors from the small blue world that gave them birth. Carry with you the comfort that achievement is possible, that ordinary origins need not define limits, that dedication and work and willingness to risk can carry you further than you might imagine, that the sky is not a ceiling but an invitation, that boundaries exist to be crossed, that every ending is also a beginning. And carry with you finally this, that Yuri Gagarin, the boy who survived occupation, the foundryman who learned to fly, the pilot who became a cosmonaut, the man who opened the gateway to space, lived a life that mattered, that made a difference, that changed what was possible for every human who came after. He lived only 34 years, but those years contained multitudes, 108 minutes in space that echo across decades, across generations, across the ever-expanding human presence in the cosmos. A smile that charmed the world,
a courage that opened new frontiers, a humanity that remained intact despite everything that tried to diminish it. The stars still wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns. But humans are no longer entirely earthbound, no longer limited to observing the cosmos from below. We can go there now, can touch the edge of infinity, can see our home world from outside, can experience weightlessness and wonder. All because one spring morning in 1961, a young man from Klushino climbed into a metal sphere atop a towering rocket and said, "Poyekhali, let's go," and went, carrying humanity with him across that threshold, into that new realm, demonstrating what was possible, showing us the way. The first will always be first. That is Yuri's gift to us, his permanent place in history, his achievement that cannot be diminished or erased regardless of what comes after. He was the human who showed it could be done, who proved that Earth's gravity could be overcome, who demonstrated that space was not a barrier but a realm humans could enter and, crucially, return from safely. But perhaps the greater gift is the example he set through how he lived, how he carried his achievement, how he remained essentially himself despite the pressures that might have transformed him into something else. He showed that it's possible to be extraordinary without ceasing to be ordinary, to achieve greatness without losing humanity, to become a symbol while remaining a person. As you drift now toward sleep, as these words fade and your consciousness begins its own journey into the personal space of dreams, carry with you, if you wish, this image, a young man from a small village looking up at the sky, seeing not a limit but a promise, not an ending but a beginning, not a ceiling but a door that swings open if only someone has the courage to push. Carry with you the knowledge that Yuri Gagarin was real, was human, was someone who felt fear and chose courage, who faced the unknown and stepped forward, who accepted the burden of being first because someone had to be first, because humanity's future required it, because the stars were waiting and had waited for billions of years and were ready finally to receive visitors from the small blue world that gave them birth. Carry with you the comfort that achievement is possible, that ordinary origins need not define limits, that dedication and work and willingness to risk can carry you further than you might imagine, that the sky is not a ceiling but an invitation, that boundaries exist to be crossed, that every ending is also a beginning. And carry with you finally this, that Yuri Gagarin, the boy who survived occupation, the foundryman who learned to fly, the pilot who became a cosmonaut, the man who opened the gateway to space, lived a life that mattered, that made a difference, that changed what was possible for every human who came after. He lived only 34 years, but those years contained multitudes, 108 minutes in space that echo across decades, across generations, across the ever-expanding human presence in the cosmos. A smile that charmed the world, a courage that opened new frontiers, a humanity that remained intact despite everything that tried to diminish it. The stars still wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns. But humans are no longer entirely earthbound, no longer limited to observing the cosmos from below. We can go there now, can touch the edge of infinity, can see our home world from outside, can experience weightlessness and wonder. All because one spring morning in 1961, a young man from Klushino
climbed into a metal sphere atop a towering rocket and said, Poyekhali, let's go, and went, carrying humanity with him across that threshold, into that new realm, demonstrating what was possible, showing us the way. The first will always be first, and first was Yuri, and that is enough, more than enough, a legacy that will endure as long as humans remember their first steps beyond Earth, their first journey into the infinite black, their first representative among the stars. Rest now. Let the story settle into your consciousness like snow settling on quiet fields, soft and complete. Tomorrow you will wake and Earth will still be spinning, and the International Space Station will still be orbiting overhead, and somewhere someone is dreaming of space, inspired by stories of those who went before, carrying forward the legacy that Yuri Gagarin began on that April morning when he became the first. Sleep well, dream of stars, and remember, if you wish, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it, that every journey begins with a single step, and sometimes that step carries you further than you ever imagined possible. Good night, and thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, the boy from Klushino who touched the stars and showed us all that the frontier is never closed, that the sky is not a limit, that humanity's story is still being written, and the best chapters may yet lie ahead. If you found value in this story, if these words brought you peace or inspiration, or simply helped you drift toward sleep, please consider subscribing to the Timeless Lore channel, where we explore the lives of remarkable people and the moments that changed history, always in this gentle, contemplative style, designed to soothe rather than stimulate, to help you find rest in our busy, often overwhelming world. Until next time, may your dreams carry you to places as wondrous as orbit, as peaceful as floating weightless among the stars, as profound as looking down on Earth from above and seeing it whole, beautiful, and impossibly precious. Sleep now. The story is complete. And somewhere in the vastness of space that Yuri first entered, the cosmos continues its eternal dance, waiting patiently for the next explorer, the next dreamer, the next person who looks up and decides that the sky is not a ceiling, but an invitation. Rest.